Well, I'm delighted to be here again in Novi Sad to work with creative entrepreneurs. I enjoyed the workshop this afternoon and I'm happy to answer your questions and to tell you something about my own journey through the creative industries to my position now working internationally, helping creative businesses to be even more successful. Well, as you say, I'm delighted that my book, T-shirts and Suits, will soon be published in Serbia. It's a real honour and a thrill, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Having published the book in many other countries around the world. In terms of my own sort of creativity and business, well, these are good questions because it raises the question of what is creativity. And I think there are probably two kinds of creativity. There's artistic creativity that we know, which is at the heart of the creative industries, the creativity of the artist, the musician, the designer, the filmmaker, etc. But I think there's also a more general kind of creativity that we find in other fields of human endeavour, which you might call ingenuity, or problem solving, or thinking outside the box. And so I think we need to be clear about these different definitions of creativity. And so coming back to myself, to answer your question, then as an artistically creative person, I'm a writer. As you know, I write books, but also sometimes I write poetry. So I would say that literature and writing is my artistic endeavour. But as a business person, running my own business, I also use that ingenuity and problem solving every day because we have to think about how to manage our businesses for the better. And so I'm using, as I call it, creativity in the studio, but also in the office. And that's what I help creative people to do. They are already very creative in their illustrations, their computer graphics, the arts and crafts, their architecture in the studio. And I also help them to be creative in the way that they run their business in terms of marketing and intellectual property, financial management, etc. Well, outside of work, I love the mountains. So in England, I'm a member of a mountaineering club and I like to walk and climb on the mountains in England. And when I get a chance, because I travel a lot through my work, I also like to walk and climb in the mountains in other countries. So I think the outdoors and particularly the mountains are my hobby. Well, it's a very good question, and I think that behind both is the human spirit, the human creativity. And human creativity can be expressed in tangible art, you might say, in paints and in clay and in real objects, and we delight in that and we are inspired by that. But we also find that human creativity can be manifested in digital art. And so I think that the two sit alongside each other. I don't think one is better than the other. I think that they each have different functions and each is good in a certain way at a certain time. I've been asked the same question, for example, about books. The paperback book versus the electronic book. Which is the best? Personally, I use both. I have many paper books and I love them. But I also find the functionality and the ease of use of electronic books good sometimes. So I think it isn't a question of one or the other. It's a bit like saying, is it better to write a letter to somebody or to phone them? Well, both have their purpose, both have the times when they're right. So I think that what is interesting is that because there is so much in the digital sphere, in some ways people like to go back to the physical. At a time when most Christmas cards are now electronic, it's a real delight to get a handwritten Christmas card from somebody. At a time when so much is on the internet and online, people actually like to go back to the traditional crafts. So I think the two balance in some ways, and they both will always exist side by side. I think the creative industries have been around for a long, long time, but perhaps we didn't use that word or that term, creative industries. In fact, you know, William Shakespeare was, as you know, a writer, but also a businessman. So if we had used the term at the time, he would have been eligible for creative industries support, perhaps. But it's only in the last 20 years, as you say, that this idea or this terminology of the creative industries was invented back in the UK, where we recognised that a lot of artistic endeavour is also of a business use. It actually is part of the economy. It stimulates jobs. It's actually not just art on the side, but actually part of society and part of the economy. And so as a result of that, in Britain, in the UK, we've had several initiatives to support the creative industries at government level and at local level. I've been involved myself as a business advisor through those initiatives, particularly in the city of Liverpool, but also elsewhere in the UK. And I think that other countries recognise that the UK is a leader in many ways in terms of public policy, but of course every country has its own creative industries, has its own strengths, whether that is in design or music or literature or film or architecture. Every country has creative industries, even though the government might not categorise those businesses using the same terminology, or perhaps doesn't have the same public policies to support them. They exist anyway, whether or not a government has a creative industries department.